Okay, so we're COMP123 and it's week 10, lesson 10, part 2. And we're talking about UI controls in more detail now. I'm just going to skip over to this. That's not what I wanted, but that's okay. That's what I want. Okay. So again, we talked about controls. We talked about the fonts and different labels. We did this all last week. We added color to the form. I didn't really add a checkbox or radio button, so we're going to try and do that today. We're going to talk about the picture box. We're going to talk about the list box, combo box, checklist box, all that stuff today. These are extra things. The month calendar, the date picker, all that stuff is what we're going to talk about today, and a menu strip. So there's a bunch of little controls we're going to talk about, and this should cover pretty much everything you need for assignment number 6. There's one piece that's missing, which is your print piece, which we're going to talk about either today or next day. Okay, so let's going to flip over to some of these things in terms of going forward. I'm going to skip through some of these things that we've already talked about, right? And we've already talked about all this stuff in terms of fonts, the way they work. You can actually adjust the fonts to these font styles and colors. We're going to talk about that a little later. But for you guys, for our demonstration here today, I'm going to pull up a new sample project. And again, for UI building, I don't know why my screen has just changed shape and size for some reason. Let me just readjust my size. Must be the way. I don't know what the hell. Screen resolution. Yeah. Maybe this. Let's try that. Is that okay? Maybe a little bit blurry, but anyways. At least it's better. I don't know what happened there. That's a weird thing. It's the projector. It's changed. Okay, so what we want to do, we're going to go File, New, Project. And in the project, of course, we're not picking this console application anymore, especially not for C++. We're picking a Visual C# Windows Forms application. That's the first one. There's a bunch of different templates here. Please don't pick WPF application. That's a totally different way of creating forms. We're not going to cover it in this course, right? But Windows Form applications are okay, and we're going to name it today COMP123, and it's going to be lesson 10, part 1. Because there's going to be 2 parts. Today, part 1. Tomorrow, part 2. Okay? And I'm just going to create this thing. Of course, as always, I'm going to share my stuff on GitHub for you, because just in case you want to follow along, and happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody, as a reminder, right? We're going to go into create a new repository, and of course I'm going to call this the same, which is COMP123 lesson 10 part 1. And again, how we link repositories for those people who are interested is Control C. In this particular case, go back here. I'm going to open this up a little bit. Is it me or is it like a little fuzzy compared to before? It's a little bit fuzzy. I may change the resolution one more time. Go to Changes and add a commit. So created base Visual Studio C# form project. And in here, I'm also going to go home and unsync commits and throw in my commit here, my URI. Okay, good. Let me try my resolution one more time, because to me it seems a little blurry, and I'm not happy with blurry resolutions. I like it just a little bit sharper than this. Let's go to 1366. See if that's a little better. Maybe that's even worse. It's a little bit blurry though. Look at the search control panel on the top. It's pretty messed up. I don't know what happened. Like everything was great, but let's revert back to, let's try a lower resolution. And I can't go too much lower, because the lower I go, maybe we do 1024 by 768. It's more square, but it's a little better than what we had. Yeah. Okay, that's better for me. and put it back in. Yeah, sometimes it helps. Let's just leave it the way it is. That's better for me. Okay. So we've connected, and remember when we first launch our application, we come to this window, and again, this shows us a couple of things. If you look at Solution Explorer here, on the right in our Solution Explorer, before we would ignore this bottom piece, this properties piece on the right-hand side. We can't ignore that now, right? We got to pull this piece up a little bit because this piece down here is contextual, which means wherever I click over here, right, it gives me properties in here. So this is just as important now as this piece up here. In fact, we're not going to do much with this compared to what we used to do, right? So I'm just going to bring this up just a touch more, just so that way we have more room to show some of these properties down here. Okay. Also on the left, we have this toolbox area that I'm hiding right now, but I can certainly pin it, but then I'm going to have only this space, right, which is a bad thing. So I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to unpin this area here, and I can always go back to Solution Explorer later, right? If you do it like me, and if you unpin the properties, then it also pops over for maximum screen size. And if I unpin my Windows forms, which by the way I don't recommend, but let me show you, then you get the maximum area for your area. Now it doesn't mean that these things are gone by any means, right? They're there. If I just hover over or click onto it, I can get what I want. But the problem with the properties, doing this with properties, or this toolbox, is I can't see my form. I can't drag and drop anything, which doesn't make any sense. So that's why I recommend you pin this one. So you're going to lose a little bit of desktop space. But these ones here, it's okay. We can kind of hover them over and do our changes here and go back, right? One of the changes I always would ask you to make, right, for your form is change this darn form name from form 1 to something else. So your form, when you hand in your assignment number 6, will be, please change it to something else. Like, call it, if I was going to do assignment number 6 with you today, I would right click and rename this thing, and of course I would call it something like sales form or something like that. Let's call it sales form. If I do that, it says, do you want to propagate these changes basically throughout your code? And I would say yes. So that way it changed. But if you notice the title bar of the form did not change. That's a different property. And of course I'm going to click properties to see that. So here's my form. I click properties. And if you notice, if I go down to the text field of my form, it says form 1 because that's what it was. If I want to make this a sales form, I've got to change my text property to sales form. Okay, now my title bar also changes. Okay, click away. This is gone. Again, I keep this fixed. I can probably make this a little smaller though to give me more working space, which is okay. And I want to try and maximize my space. I'm going to save this thing. Oops. I'm going to save this thing, and if I run it, if I click the start button, it'll launch my Windows form application the way it is. Now if you notice, I have a review from last week. It starts way over here, right? So, and this is a property of the form. I haven't told it specifically where to start, and it's starting in its default location. If I want to start it anywhere special, like for example center screen, which I recommend, right? Then I'm going to go back into Solution Explorer, make sure that this form is clicked. Go to properties, and under Windows state it says normal. And if you look up, if you keep looking, it says start position is Windows default location. Change this so that it's center screen. If you change this to center screen now, click away and run it, then of course what will happen is it'll pop into the center of the screen, right? Okay, so that's one of the first things I'd like you to do. Whenever you make a form, change a couple of those values, right? Because that makes no sense to me. Also, if I wanted to look at the code view on this form, how could I do it the easiest way? Well, if I right-click on this on the top bar here, if you notice, I have a bunch of options for the top bar. So this really doesn't do what I want it to do if you try and get to the form. If I double-click the form, remember what it does. Don't do it. It actually takes you into code view, but it also adds an event, which we don't want to do. It actually a little code stub, which you don't want to add in there. But remember what happens if we take it away. So I'll do it. I'll show you this bad thing. Don't do this bad thing, right? So if I double click, it takes me here, and I have this sales form load event. Well, I don't need this sales form load event, right? I want to get rid of it, and I just do something silly like erase it, like this. And I save my form, I save my form and go back to my sales design, and it's, bam, I don't know what happened. I get this big error, and I'm afraid, and I'm frustrated, and I want to stop programming, right? Please don't do this. It's not that difficult to fix, right? You just have to go back over to sales, the design side or the coding side, and put it back, right? Put it back. So Control Z, if possible, put it back. And when you save again and go back, it's there. Why? Because remember, there's 3 parts to every form, right? Nice hat, buddy. I love the hat, right? There's 3 parts to every form. One part is, I'm going to go back to Solution Explorer for a second. If you look at the sales form itself, it has this little down arrow. And if it's a collapsible option here, and if you uncollapse everything so you can see everything inside, you see that there's a CS file, which is your code file. You see your sales form, which is the design document. And you see this .resx, which is your resource document. And if I was to double click on this for a second, you'll see that it's a bunch of resources. So that's not really what I'm looking for in here. But if I go back to solution, this designer, please don't touch it. If I double click on it, it's another document that basically tells us what we're expecting to see on the form, right? I don't recommend you touch this thing whatsoever, this designer.cs form. Again, I'm just going over this with you just in case you have an issue, an error, and you're like, I want to pull my hair out because I don't know what happened. How come my design view is gone, right? So how do I delete this event, right? Remember that your properties panel over here, let's go over here, there's these little buttons up here if you notice. There's this one here which is properties, and there's another with lightning bolt. You see the lightning bolt here, it talks about events. So if I click on the events, right, you see that I've got a load event automatically generated because I double clicked, right? I want to get rid of this load event. And again, I clicked on the lightning bolt icon over here to do that. So I just get rid of it by, it's not what I wanted. Sorry. I just get rid of it by copying and deleting it. And then clicking away, click away, click away. And if I want to look at design view again or code view, I go to my Solution Explorer and I double click on this, not this designer, right, but this CS form right here. If I double click on this thing, right, and I want to view the code, or click F7, I can see the code. And now this salesform.load is still here, right, see? But I can get rid of it because it has no impact. It has no impact, right? If I go back to my salesform.cs, it's still there, everything's good. So again, it generates, whenever you double click on any control, including the form itself, it generates an automatic code stub, right? This code stub is an event handler. You cannot remove it when it's there so easily. You can't just delete it. If you delete it, you'll mess up your form. You have to undelete it, or Control Z, and go back and remove it from the event list that you see by clicking the properties panel and this lightning bolt. Okay, that's the only way you can take it away. And then you can remove it manually. Let's stick back to this properties panel now for again. I'm just going to click away. Okay, so good. Here's my form, and I've got these 2 pieces. I've got my sales form, which is the design document, and I've got my sales form, which is the CS file. And again, the way I got to that CS file without any kind of destructive way is if you see my sales form right here on the right-hand side, if I right-click and I say View Code, I can get to that. If I want to see the designer, I can get to that. If I want to see the class diagram, I can get to that. But the only thing we need right now is View Code if you want to see the code. Okay? Okay. And by the way, this class diagram can still be generated just like we did when we were doing console applications. We won't have to do that. We won't have to do many things with classes here on in. Okay. So here's our sales form. And again, we talked about how all the common controls and buttons are on the left-hand side, right? Like, for example, I have all Windows forms right here, right? So these are all the controls in alphabetical order, right? Or you can break it down by type. For example, common controls like pointer, button, checkbox, blah, blah, whatever, right? And there's also containers like that group box I told you about. Here's that group box container right here. So you can find all your controls in your toolbox, right? And if you don't have your toolbox, somehow your window didn't pop up with a toolbox, you can always find any window by going to View and then Toolbox, and that'll bring up your window, right? Or sometimes you might find them in other windows. There's a bunch of other windows here that's hidden. But the most common windows are right here: Solutions Explorer, Team Explorer, All kinds of other things are here, and you can always pop up any window you want through this View menu in Visual Studio. Questions so far? Clear? Okay, let's go back. So again, let's talk about this link label. A link label, it looks like a label, but provides additional capability. And what does it do? It basically allows us to use other resources like web pages or files, right? And again, there's a default event. The method, it's basically automatically calculated when we double-click the control. It creates this stub event, if you will, and then the method you're mostly likely to alter is the control. Okay, so let's take a look at this. These are the different kinds of properties for the link label, active link color, and so on. I'm not going to explore this link label so much because typically we don't use link labels when we create forms. Why would I want a link label on a form? Typically not, right? But you could, if you wanted to link to a website somehow, you wanted to get some more information, then you would use a link label for that. So I'm not going to explore this option. I'm not going to test you on it, but it's there for your perusal. I'm just going to move forward with the link label. But one thing interesting here is how they code the event handler. If you notice, here's the event handler. When your link label is clicked, it creates this special event handler called link clicked, right? And then inside here, of course, you can, it tells you what to go for. You can actually, this is the code you put in, system.diagnostics.process.start. And of course, you're going to start Internet Explorer, in this case, because it's all Microsoft or Google or Chrome or whatever else you want to start here. And you want to go to this, whatever the link that you want to go to. I'm not going to ask you to do this. One thing to note, we talked about files and absolute paths and all that stuff one time. If you notice this @ symbol that's in front of this string, it means that take the raw string, interpret it as raw. So the @ symbol combined with the quotation marks, right? And what this means is that I don't need any escape characters for the backslashes and so on. That's what it does. So if you ever see this @ symbol with a quotation mark, that's what it means. Take the raw string the way you see it. Okay. And here's an example of that event handler that you would normally create for the link label. It's very similar to what we did last week with the button handler that we made. Color to the form, we covered that last week. How we can do, now this is one thing I'd like to put in, checkboxes, a radio button of objects. Hey, you have a radio button. This is great, you know, kind of a preview of how to put that together. So let's kind of add them in. One is a checkbox, and the other one is a radio button. Okay, and of course we group them together. So for radio buttons, checkboxes are single. So let's do that. Let's add a couple of radio buttons and some group box to the form, right? So first of all, I want to resize my form by dragging these control handles. And then I want to go into containers on the left-hand side where my toolbox is. And I want to grab a group box, okay? And I want to drag and drop the group box onto my form so that there's two control handles that come up. These little smart guides, if you notice, these little blue things that come up, right? Okay, there's my control box, and it actually gives me a little bit. I don't know if you guys can see it up here you cannot. There's no contrast for you up here. But if you look in front of you, you can see that there's a bit of an outline for the group box that kind of comes around. And there's also the name of your group box, which is standard, right? Which, if you notice here, is group box 1, right? If we want to change the name of that, I'm going to change the name of that right now. Again, I have to highlight the group box to go to my properties. So here's my properties for the group box, and if you notice it says group box 1. Let's just say I'll call this sales channel. Okay, so if I click sales channel and click away, right, now my group box is renamed sales channel, and I might have a couple of options here, right? So in here, I can add additional controls that are going to be part of this container. Okay, so let's see if I was to add some other kinds of controls, like for example, if I go to all common controls and click a checkbox, let's click this one, and if I drag and drop it into inside my group box, see how it highlights? If I go here, my form highlights with control handles. If I go here, the group box highlights when I'm click dragging, right? If I drop the actual control inside my group box, it adds not only the checkbox, but also a label that's associated to it automatically, right? For example, this checkbox 1. Now what happens if I want to move the group box? If I click the group box, and if I see where it says this control will change, if I hover over it on the top left-hand corner of the group box, if I click this control here, not these handles, but this control here, and drag the whole group box, the checkbox is now associated as a child of the group box, right? So I can move everything around. So I can reposition my container the way I like. Okay? So here's my checkbox. If you look at it, if I want to change the value or the text label of my text box, of my checkbox here, I'm going to go here, click Properties. This has to be highlighted so that my Properties menu is contextual, so I can change the value, the text value of my checkbox property. Whew. So I want to say something like, let's do a show. Right? Here's a show, right? And what this does is when I click this checkbox on, it's going to show or hide some controls. How about that? Right? If I unclick it, it's going to hide the controls, right? So for my sales channel. Okay, so I'm going to click away. Okay, cool. Let's resize this sales channel group box to make it a little bit smaller because I think it's just too big for what I want to do. Right? There we go. It's on the left-hand side now. So there's my checkbox, and if I run this thing, let's run it the way it is, just like right now. I run it, comes up in the middle of my screen, and if you notice, if I click this box, it's a check mark that comes up to it, right? Check marks, and I can kind of check on and check off. But what is this check on and check off thing I speak of? It's not Chekhov, like the Russian Chekhov playwright. It's not check off, check on, right? But what it does do is it's a true-false value, on, off, right? So if I click on, it generates an event. Right now we're listening for all events, but we're not handling any events. Remember we talked about event handling and listening last week, right? In any language, and again, take this away when you leave this course, okay? So this is important. When you have an event listener, right, you can register an event listener, right, with the program to listen for specific events. The great things about Windows and Windows Forms are, consider that all event listeners have been written for you. They're listening for everything right now. Everything has been registered. All you need to do is kind of write your own handler. And of course, if we just double click on the control, it gives us a stub for the exact handler we need. So you don't have to guess to see what it is. In other UI building environments, it's not just a drag and drop. Sometimes you have to specifically, in Java, it's way more complicated than this. If you're building Android applications or iOS applications, it's way more complicated than this. It's not just as simple as dragging, dropping, and clicking. Trust me, you'll be happy with Visual Studio because it does a lot of the writing for you, right? Okay, so let's click away from this thing. So I want to do it so that way when I click on my checkbox, I double click on my click on my checkbox, something kind of appears or disappears, right? This is kind of a show or hide. If I click off, it obviously hides. And I want to make it so that, let's say, a group of buttons or another little control over here kind of shows and hides. So let's use another container. We'll say here's our containers, and we'll just kind of drag and drop another group box here. And if you notice, if I come close to the other group box here, it gives me another little guide. It's actually a constraint. It tells me that it's going to be this far away from this group box here, right? Here's my other group box 2. I'm going to resize this thing so that way it kind of shows me the constraint on the right-hand side. And I'm going to make this quite big. So I'm going to make it so it spans the whole form itself. And my sales channel, I want this to basically have a bunch of things here. In my group box, I'm going to rename this thing to my group box 2. I have that highlighted. I'm going to rename the group box 2 to options. Right? By the way, I'm making it up as I go, so just bear with me. Now, there's a couple of issues here that I want to point out to you. Right? We've populated some of these controls on here, and we're taking the default names of these controls, which is a bad practice. We're going to fix that in a second. Let's put in here a couple of maybe a button. So I'm going to go to Common Controls again, open that up. I'm going to click on this button and drag and drop it inside this Options group box, right? And we're going to call this button down here. I'm going to rename it, take the properties of this button and rename this thing Submit. Okay, so I got my submit button, right? It comes up. And now the whole form, this whole options section here, right? I want to go, I'm highlighting the whole group box here. I'm going to go back to properties. And where it says, if you notice, you see where it says visible, make that false by default, false. Okay, well that means that when I generate my form, take a look now, I'm going to run my form here. I don't see my button. And I want to click this, and when I click this button, it's going to show this. How do I do that? Well, I have to double click on this control. But before I go there, I want to name all my stuff that I've got on here. How do I do that? First, I click on the control I want to rename. I go to properties, and I scroll all the way to the top, right? If you see at the top, the name in parentheses here is the actual variable name for my control. I don't want it to be called checkbox 1. I might have 10 checkboxes. I want to be differentiating them one from the other. So I would say show checkbox is more of the name I want. And I want you to use show checkbox all caps like this, upper camel case. Show checkbox, all upper camel case, right? I don't want you to use camel case like we used to when it comes to regular variables. These are controls. So we're going to make them all like this, upper camel case for all our controls, okay? I want you to practice this same best practice when we use controls when it comes to how we do stuff for your assignments and for the exam. Okay, show checkbox. So now that's what this name is, show checkbox. Okay, let's click on the group object, this group box, and now let's go back here, right? If you notice, it's group box 1. That means nothing, right? It should be something like sales channel group box. It's pretty big, eh? Sales channel. You can take it though, group box. I don't mind big names like that because you know what? Chances are we're not going to use it anyway. All right. Same thing with when we click the options. Go to properties, right? Options group box. Okay, so what am I doing? I'm naming these things so I can use them in code. If I don't name them right, I'm going to search for group box 1. That's bad, man. Right? Let's click away. One more thing. My submit button's got to change, right? We're going to properties. If you notice this button 1 on the top here with my name, I'm going to change this to submit button. Upper camel case, right? Okay, cool. I've got my submit button. I've got all these things have been named. I got my sales form has been named. Everything's been changed. Let's double click now on my show checkbox. So double click. Okay, now this is where I'm going to take away this for a second just so you have maximum space to see. This is where I have an advantage, right? Here's where my automatically generated event handler has been made for me. And if you notice, it says when my checkbox has changed. That's the kind of event I'm generating when I double click. I mean, I can certainly change this type of event manually, but the default event for checkboxes is what? When they get changed, which makes sense, right? So this is my event handler. Remember, my event listener has already been registered. I don't have to worry about that because Visual Basic and Visual C# and Visual F# out of the box are listening for every event, right? Okay, and again, when on compile time, it removes the events that you don't need. Okay, so it's more efficient that way. Okay, so let's take a look at this show checkbox. Show checkbox is the name. I know that I'm firing out the right control, right? And I want to create my event handler for this when my checkbox is changed. Well, what do I want to do? I want to make my options group box. That's what I called it. I want to change the visible property to true, right? So let's put that in. So options. I'm going to start typing options. If I can type options group. Hey, there it is. Options group box. It comes up in my IntelliSense, right? This is cool. Options group box, cool. Dot. I'm going to use a dot accessor method, and of course I want the visible property, right? Visible property. I want that to equal to true, right? Visible true, right? So when I click on the checkbox, when I check it, the visible property gets changed to true. Okay. Here's a problem. Yeah.
You couldn't have done that in the properties menu, I guess, no?
Well, I made it false because I don't want it to show right away. I want it when you click on the show button, then it shows everything. But for by default, I want to make it false. Okay, question. Remember we did this last time, a toggle effect. When I click on this again, if it's already true, right, then when I unclick it, I want it to be false, right? So I gotta figure this out. If I check changed, if I check this out, if it changes the check value, right now I'm setting it off as true, it's going to go true, but it's going to stay true forever. Once I check this on, I can't, even if I uncheck it, it doesn't go away. Let's see what I'm talking about. I'm going to just run everything the way it is. Watch. It's off, right? I check it, and it appears, right? If I uncheck it, oh man, it doesn't go away, right? Is there another event, you might ask yourself, to help us out, right? That I can kind of call. Well, first of all, let me put some comments here, because comments, you're getting paid for comments and marks, right? So I'm going to say, this is my event handler for show checkbox. Changed event. I'm just mentioning what it is, what kind of event I'm changing. My check changed. Okay, so that's what I'm targeting here, right? Okay, cool. I'm going to just save this, and then I'm going to go to my sales form again. I'm going to click on my checkbox just one time, and I'm going to go to properties, and now I'm going to go to this lightning bolt, right? Instead of my there's two little buttons here. I'm going to go to my lightning bolt and see what kind of other events I can have. Well, here's check state changed. It's not really what I want. It's not going to really help, because the check state, whether it's on or off, it doesn't really matter, right? My back color changed, my background image changed, my clicks doesn't really do it, client size changed, control added, control removed, cursor changed, drag and drop, enter, all these other controls, and if foreground change or whatever, if I keep going down, do I see anything that might help me? Text change, tap stop change, validating, size change, style change, resize. These are all the different events you can listen for, or you can create an event handler for, right? They're listening for all these things in the beginning. There's really nothing here that's customized, so that way I can do anything here, which means I got to write it myself. I'm not going to write a new event handler. I'm going to write a little if statement that basically says if this is true, right? And how do I check to see if it's visible? Well, I'm going to check to see if this thing is visible, and if it's already visible, right, which means I've already checked. In my mind, I've already checked this box, right? I can check for visibility. I can also see if this thing is checked, like if my control is checked. Let's see if I can do that. Let me go back to my sales form. And if I can say this, if I look at the show checkbox, let's look at that. I'm going to put this I'm going to add a line in front of this one, right? Can I check to if, I'm going to start my if statement, if show checkbox, right, show checkbox dot, and now let's see what I can choose. Appearance changed. These are all the properties, right? Auto check, no. Checked. Hey, if it's checked, right, if it's checked, if that property is true, right, then that's a property, and that's not a state, right? And you know what? I should have known this. Oh, damn, because any property that shows up here with this little wrench, guess what? It shows up in my design time over here, right? So if I click over here and go through this, right, not on the lightning bolt, but on the properties button, I have it checked, and it says false, which means I could check to see if it's true or false. If the property exists here, I can compare against it. Right? Okay, cool. That's pretty cool. Let's go back here. So that means if my show checkbox is already checked, right, then I'm going to change this to false, my visibility, right? Because now I'm changing it from checked to unchecked, right? If show checkbox dot checked. Now, do I have to go like this? Do I have to actually say equals to true? Well, best practices would mean, yeah, you probably want to show this, but it would also accept it if you just didn't have this here. Why? Because show checkbox.check, the check property is a Boolean value, and it's either true or false. And when you do a conditional statement, you check for true and false. So theoretically, you don't have to really put it there. But I'm going to put it there for clarity. Okay? I'm going to use my braces. Right, here's my braces. And if my checkbox is checked, which means I've already clicked on it and the group box is visible, I want to make it invisible. I want to change my visibility to false. I'm going to copy this line and put it in here and change this to false, right? Because now it's going to be unchecked. Else, when it's unchecked, right, here's my else, my other condition, right? I want my group box to be visible. Let's see if this works. All I'm doing is a very simple statement here. Does that make sense? Okay, let's try this out. Actually, it reads nicely. When you have contextual variable names for your controls, it reads nice and clear, right? You don't have to guess what the hell they are. You don't have to sit there and go, group box 1, what's group box 1, what's checkbox 1? I don't have to remember these things. It's going to be contextual. So when you do your assignment number 6, and for your exam next week, I want all the controls to be contextual, all right? I don't want you to just make weird names for your controls. That makes no sense, okay? And don't make short forms. I don't want GBX, group box, or what you call it, checkbox, CKs, checkbox, something weird like that, or SCHK. I want the full name of the control, please. Okay? I know it's tedious. I know it's ugly. Is it? So if my checkbox is checked, if I check onto it, right? If it's true, if it's already checked, it doesn't start already checked. It starts unchecked, right? Let me show you what I mean. Right now, is it checked? How about now? 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 Right? So very good. So again, what we want to do is we kind of put these the other way around, right? Good for you. We would have figured this out on runtime. Right? Again, this is design time. We're doing some design, some programming here, true and false. If I run this now, right, I see that if I click on this box, it appears. If I unclick it, it disappears. And I have this toggle set on and off. I can do this as many times as I want, and it's not going to affect my form in any way. Okay, here's something that I want you to try. This was nice, but it's inefficient, right? Why? Because you can write this whole thing in one line. Remember we talked about the ternary operator? Right? Hey, you guys are in programming too. You need to know this stuff. So let's write this in a slightly different way, which, by the way, I will accept both versions if you're not good with the ternary operator. So I'm going to go options group box, right, dot visible is equal to, and this is where it is, show checkbox dot checked, right? Question mark, right? True, colon, false, semicolon. And this whole line, I'm just going to comment this stuff out right here so you see that it works the same. So I'm going to go, kind of comment this out, right? Put this down over here. And we'll do a little bit of, we'll put this in stasis. And I'll have one line for my code, this one line here that actually eats up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines. Right? Yeah. This is back to programming 1, right? So it's saying, I'm going to assign the value true or false to this control depending on whether or not my show checkbox is checked or not. That's what it's saying in one line, right? The question mark is the condition. After the thing that comes after the question mark is the condition when it's true, and the thing that comes after the colon is the condition when it's false. True, false. So this is a perfect example of how we can use this. Let's see if it works. So again, click it, on, off, right? And it works with one line of code as opposed to 8 lines of code. I will accept both ways. If you're really not good with the ternary operator, and you don't understand what I did there, and you never took it in programming 1, and you don't want to learn about it, it's okay. I can accept the other way. Okay? Sorry? It works greatly for bool. When it's something like this, when it's a Boolean operator, because basically what we're saying is this result has to be Boolean, like true or false, then this is a great place to use it because it saves us 8 lines of code or 7 other lines, right? But to me, if you're not comfortable with this, I'll put this in stasis now, right, for a second, and I'll put this back in play so you can see that both work equivalently, right? They're the same. And I'll make a little comment here that says, better way to write the above. Sorry, just a comment. So here's my, is this a better way to write the above? And it is, it's true. The truth is, it is a better way. You'll see this code, even though it looks ugly to you, when you look at it, you're like, God, that looks ugly. That question mark and that colon, right? Yeah, but it's one line of code. right? It's called a ternary operator, but you should have learned in programming 1, okay? Let's leave it the way it is, though. I'm going to save everything and go back, and we've done our little example of a checkbox. So we're sitting at 132. I want to stop recording and take a bit of a break in the middle here, and then we'll come back and talk about radio buttons.